Dear all, it's Borbala checking in from Budapest for RP525, Unit 6, and this week our focus will be the data collection and understanding the importance of data. So within this couple of minutes video, I would like to highlight three main areas. Firstly, I would like to talk about the data itself and why we need it. Then I would like to link it to a little bit more to the theory. And thirdly, I would like to list some questions that is very helpful while we are collecting data to understand why are we doing it. But all in all, what makes action research different from simply intentional practice is the data, that you have something to prove to the outside audience why you are saying what you are saying, why you are doing what you are doing. So now you have been done your actions, you are still in your actions, and certainly many of you will continue your actions after November. But at this point, it's important to collect evidence of the feedback and evidence of the impact you have on others and the impact of the changes that you have done in your practice. So we are looking for data, and while looking for data, we talk about data gathering, data categorization, and the analysis of data. Very simply about categories, since it's not a formal science, social science research, it's action research focusing on you. You don't need to think of very difficult categories, but you will see that some of your data tells something about yourself, like reflections. Some of the data tells something about the community you are working with, like surveys or focus group discussions. Some of the data, so one category can be yourself, data about yourself, data about others. Quantitative data that are numeric, so when you use scales or you use surveys and you want to collect a larger number, versus qualitative, when you use texts and observations and certain more qualitative indicators. We can also say some of the data sources you are sure about, and that's another category than the ones you are not that sure about, and you can collect them and separate them, and while you are doing your analysis you can look at these two categories differently. Whatever you create as category system within your data, the only thing I ask you is just keep it logical. So as you would think very simply, what makes it useful, what could help the reader, your audience to better understand what you have found, what you have collected in a logical system. And the reason we collect data is not only dissemination, is that for ourselves, if we see the impact, if we see the proof, we know why we change our practice. So allow your data to drive your learning. I mean by this that instead of you want to highlight a certain issue and you just change the data so that it fits your assumptions and hypotheses, change the sequence. It's the data that tells you what you have actually achieved, and what you are understanding from the data has an impact on your learning and on your future actions. And don't forget that your focus is your personal learning. So you don't need to change the world, you don't need to save the world or change others. That's not the aim of this research. The aim is that you want to become a better practitioner, and in order to do that, you make some changes in your practice, you collect data on the impact of your changes, and through the data you understand what you can continue to do and what you need to change in the future. So the focus is you. How it's linked to theory. I drew another cool figure, I hope so. Can you see it? I called it the pyramid lift. The pyramid because it's a triangle, and the lift. I visualize it as a lift. You on the bottom you have the events, you have your actions. That's your decisions what you are doing and what's happening in that context. Through that you have the observations, what you have seen. You can look at that with many senses. Observations lead to data. If you collect it in a systematic way, you will have your data. When you have your data, you sit down and try to understand what does it mean. I call it analysis. And it's beautiful, I find it at least beautiful, that when you analyze the data, you will have conclusions. What have I learned on the micro level? For example, if you do something with 101, what are the conclusions on me, on the other person, or if I'm doing it in a small circle, on them. But also you can learn a lot about your meso level. So if you work with a school community or a village community or a company, you see the impact also on the meso level, on the community level. And believe it or not, whatever you found in your micro and meso level has an impact on the macro level. How human beings work together, have their dynamics together, and how even our social infrastructure is built up through these dynamics. So what we say in action research, that whatever we found as observations on the baseline indeed has an impact on macro level dynamics. And I visualize it as a lift, so you can always go up, you will always go down. You can even work from a macro level theory, let's call fair process theory or shame theory, restorative practices theories that are macro level theories, and you can think about what does that mean in your micro setting. So the reason I called it a lift is that it allows you to travel up and down, and I think this is one of the beauty of this action research, that you can find, and you need to find the links between the different levels each time, and that makes you a conscious researcher and an intentional practitioner. And also what is important, that you collect the data from diverse sources. So if you collect only observations, or if you do just some interviews, that's okay, but that's not that strong. So try to have several sources, data collection sources. You don't need big samples, you don't need big numbers, but try different approaches also to test the different ways of data collection. Again, your focus through this data analysis will be how you act, how it impacted others, what have you learned, what have you reflected on your actions and the impact, and what have the impacts retold you, and what have you relearned after understanding the impact of your actions. So finally, some couple of questions that we can ask while collecting and deciding which data we would like to collect. So what we want to understand, what did I learn from my actions, and what am I sure of? So I can say a couple of things and conclusions, micro, meso, and macro level, maybe micro and meso level, that I'm sure of, that I'm certain of, and that's great. And there are some other conclusions I am not that sure of, and that's also great in action research, when you can say that yes, these are the questions that I'm not that sure of, and it's not a mistake, it's not a weakness, it's a very important question, and you might have several of those questions by the end of the process, which is great, because these are the questions that push social science ahead. So we can see these conclusions, and we can further question, what does those conclusions mean in my context and in general? And what are the limitations of my research and of my actions? And also we can ask the question of transferability and sustainability. Anything I learned from this small setup, what can I transfer to another settings? Can it work similarly in another setting? Or can it work similarly in another time? Can it be sustained if the sample is not 1 or 10 people, but 100 and 1,000 of people? So we can think about the sustainability and transferability. Also, we have to think about who might be interested in my conclusions, and who else can be or might be interested. Who is my audience? Who can learn? Who can benefit from the things I've learned through my actions? And yes, what we want to ask is, what have I found to be true, and what supports that truth, and what are those things that does not support my assumptions at the beginning. And that's also important. So we don't need to verify and say about all our previous thoughts that was right. It's also a great conclusion and learning point if we realize that although we thought this before my actions, now by the end of my actions I thought of that. And the last question I always ask in doing such research to myself: and so what? Very simple question, but it means that whatever you will write down as your final story in your final research paper, I might ask, okay, but why was that important? Why did it what did it teach to us? Shortly, and so what? And I think it's a great question, because if you meet your neighbor or your parents and asking you what are you doing and why you are doing it and what is that action research, they will ask, and so what? Why is it good for me that you are doing this? And it's great if you can give some further conclusions and ideas and reflections on why is that important, all the learnings you found through your actions and through your reflections and through your data. So basically, this is what I thought to raise for as a food for thought before we start the unit and before you consciously focus on the data gathering. And I wish you good luck with finding the beauty in the data. And I also will send you one article that helps the data collection and analysis thoughts to be put together. And if you have any questions, again, we are here in the PLG. There is the reading book, and I'm individually available as well. So feel free to ask your questions and start enjoying the data gathering and data collection phase. I wish you good luck with everything, and take care and be well. Ciao.